argument that I want to make is essentially threefold. First of all, ISIS probably has the most sophisticated media operation of any global terrorist network in history. Secondly, I want to argue that censorship will not achieve anything meaningful at all. And thirdly, that the only solution to this crisis is to rebut the message itself. So first of all, I'll talk about, very briefly, what ISIS are actually doing, what are their strategic objectives, and then how we, the West, the civilized world, should respond. So ISIS have got a very sophisticated media operation. They have an English language newspaper. They post their major speeches in 7 different languages. They have Twitter accounts in Arabic, English, French, and German. Thousands of their followers have installed an app that was created by ISIS itself, which essentially swamps social media at a large announcement. Their messages are tailored specifically to the demographic that they're aiming at, so Muslims in the West and also Muslims in neighbouring countries. Their movies, they have sophisticated movies and documentaries. We've seen one where they have drone footage from after a battle in Fallujah, and some of their stuff is very, very soft. You know, we all hear about the beheading videos and so on, but the majority of their stuff is actually targeted at families. You know, you have fun day outs and carnivals and competitions and, you know, kids getting prizes and so on. So it's a highly sophisticated documentaries and media series as well. Their audio footage, the audio speeches are uploaded to SoundCloud. Their pictures are uploaded to Instagram. They have messages through a WhatsApp, etc. And when these accounts are closed, they simply reopen new ones. So in other words, they have a very sophisticated operation. And we've come very far from the days of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, when bin Laden would stand in front of a cave, you know, giving a speech, or he'd record an audio, and then that was couriered by secure courier to be broadcast on TV. And the reason why is because their purposes are actually very different. They have evolved considerably. For the message that ISIS, the strategic objective of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda was essentially to inspire self-starter cells. So you look after 9/11, the major terrorist attacks, 7/7 in London, Madrid bombing, Bali, Casablanca, they were all self-starter cells in which they were inspired by Al-Qaeda. ISIS' objective is very different. Their objective is to secure and expand on their territory. And underneath that propaganda, there are 2 key objectives. First of all, they want to radicalize people to come and join their struggle, to travel to Syria and essentially join their larger struggle. And secondly, to build and grow their brand. Building and growing the brand has a number of objectives. It amplifies their message, it promotes their victories and achievements, and it signals to the world and potential recruits of their success and the fact that ISIS is now an important player, an important actor on the world stage. As Nadia mentioned, success breeds success. The more successful they are, if you're a young radical, that's the organisation that you will join. You will join the one that's going to pay you, that's going to equip you, that has success. You're not going to join the one that can't even give you a proper weapon. So these 2 objectives, the radicalisation of the population and the building of the brand, they complement each other. So finally, how should the West, how should we respond? It is already illegal in most countries to incite hatred, to incite people to violence. So the laws already exist for many of these accounts and so on to be shut down. In the UK, for example, in my country, they have a much stricter version of this. In 2006, the government passed a law for the incitement of religious violence, so it's a little bit stricter. So the laws exist already. But we actually see that ISIS it doesn't catch ISIS out, because what they do is generalise hate speech, and they have radical rhetoric. That is a majority of their actual material. And this case of restricting what the media wishes to report is actually very weak, and it's not the tool that we should adopt if you want to defeat this ideology. Now let's look at the arguments. First of all, people say that ISIS spreads fear. So if you look after the California bombings, you know that I was in the US at the time, the fear was spread, you know, throughout society. You know, people were saying, when's the next attack going to be? Let's shut down on immigrants. How many of these Syrian immigrants are ISIS supporters and so on? But this doesn't make sense, because we don't restrict the news after a natural disaster. If there's an earthquake in Los Angeles and scientists tell you, look, there's a possibility that there'll be aftershocks and so on, we don't restrict that. That spreads fear. If there's a plane crash and experts tell you, look, there's a problem with this particular type of plane, their fuselage and so on, we don't restrict that reporting either. We don't restrict reporting because it spreads fear. That is not a reason. Some people argue that, look, it incites violence. But all the research on the mechanics of the radicalization process demonstrate that this is not how radicalization works. People simply do not watch a video or hear an audio and then decide to become a radical. It is certainly a contributing factor, it is certainly an exacerbating factor, but it's not the key factor. Others will argue that this is bad strategy. After all, we have the ability to shut them down. Why do we want to give them what they want? Why are we allowing them to use our technology that we have developed, the tools that we have developed, to expand their message and their brand? But that is not a good enough reason either. Restricting the media reporting and shutting down the information process is actually doing a big disservice to our people, giving them the information of what is going on in the world. Restricting the coverage essentially means that people will know less about what ISIS are doing. Therefore, the struggle against them will take a less order of priority. It will be therefore much harder for our leaders to mobilize public opinion against them, to fight them, and it will undermine our intelligence, military and financial aspects against them. And this will also set a very dangerous precedent for freedom and press. It's a precedent that says that the only way that we can tackle our enemies is to shut them down, shut down their messaging. This is essentially a failing strategy. So the question is, how do we ever restrict, how should we try to restrict the messaging? The fact of the matter is that no single government can actually do this. Yeah, so I have looked into, and I did speak to a number of experts, the technology simply does not exist to shut down a massive media operation like this. So there's no legal or technical solutions to this. If you're talking about government censorship, this is a very dangerous road to take. If you're talking about media self-censorship, it's equally very dangerous. If a terrorist attacks, if there's a terrorist attack and ISIS posts a very glossy video of this online, we should be able to talk about that incident just as we are talking about it right now. This should not be restricted. My argument is that the best way to deal with ISIS propaganda is not to shut it down, but to stop it achieving its actual objectives. And there's been considerable research done on this, on the mechanics of radicalisation, of how people actually become radicalised, and I can talk more about this in the question and answers. But we have to start, first of all, of thinking of radicalisation as a public health issue. So this is done in many European countries and many Middle Eastern countries, to treat it the same way as we would treat as a society an addiction to drugs, to treat it as people join a cult membership, to treat it in the same way as grooming happens in a society. You take police action, investigation action, and this is the way we should treat it, as a public health issue in a society. Because radicalisation can happen in any society. It's not just Muslims that actually get radicalised by ISIS. There have been cases in which, in Germany in particular, I remember reading of one, in which young white people were getting radicalised. And there's a number of success stories, case studies that we could look at from Indonesia and Saudi Arabia, in which they've actually managed to break this radicalisation process. So when people are vulnerable and exposed to this propaganda, we should essentially hold off and try to tackle the messaging itself rather than go around the very slippery slope of media censorship. Those simply will not work. If I was a media conglomerate and there was an agreement by everybody not to report it, and I knew my ratings are going to go up by reporting this, by having this great exclusive, I would simply report it. It's really that simple. It simply will not work in a global marketplace.